April 29th, 1945, Munich, Germany. The bridge is falling. I can hear it. Steel screaming against itself, concrete cracking like bones. I'm 300 meters away, running through rubble that used to be streets, and I can still feel the vibration through my boots when it finally goes down. The Ludwigsbrücke, one of the oldest crossings over the Isar River, collapses into the water in a cloud of dust and failure. I helped destroy it. 3 hours ago, I wired the explosives myself. If you want to hear untold stories of transformation from Wepp's final days, subscribe and hit that bell. Like this video if you believe expertise can rebuild what war destroys. Comment below. Can technical skill ever make up for the destruction it caused? Your engagement keeps these engineering stories alive. Now back to April 1945. My name is Dr. Friedrich Weber. I'm 34 years old, and until yesterday, I was a senior civil engineer with the Reich Ministry of Transport. Doctorate from Technical University of Munich, 1936. Specialization, bridge design and structural engineering. Bridge demolished 0347 hours, 29 April 1945. Wehrmacht Engineer Battalion 627. Officer responsible, Hauptmann Dr. Friedrich Weber. Strategic denial complete. That's what I wrote in my final report, in the careful technical language I'd learned to use. Strategic denial, as if calling it something clinical made it less like vandalism, less like destroying my own life's work. The Americans were coming. Everyone knew it. The war was over in everything but official declaration. Hitler was in his bunker in Berlin, probably already dead, though we wouldn't know for days. The Reich was collapsing like a building with its foundations removed, slowly at first, then all at once, and we were destroying everything in their path. Bridges, roads, railways, factories. Anything that might be useful to the advancing enemy. Scorched earth, they called it. As if burning the earth would somehow save us. I'd spent my entire career building bridges. Now I was blowing them up. The irony wasn't lost on me. I wasn't always a destroyer. Before the war, God, it feels like a lifetime ago, I was going to change Germany's infrastructure. I had plans, beautiful plans, bridges that would span impossible distances, that would connect cities and people and possibilities. I studied under the great engineers, learned from Mayar's concrete work, from the elegant suspension designs coming out of America. Yes, America. Even then, we knew they were the masters of long-span bridges. The Golden Gate, finished in 1937. The George Washington Bridge, structures that made you believe in human achievement, in our ability to connect what nature had separated. I wanted to build things like that. Instead, I built for the Reich. Not willingly, not at first. But when you're young and talented, and the government is investing in massive infrastructure projects, when they're building the Autobahn network and modernizing the entire country, when they promise you resources and respect and the chance to create something lasting, you convince yourself that the politics don't matter, that engineering is pure, neutral, above ideology. You tell yourself that bridges don't care who crosses them. You're wrong, of course. But you don't realize that until much later, when you're standing in the ruins of everything you built, preparing to blow it all to pieces. I joined the Wehrmacht in 1940, not because I was particularly patriotic, but because the alternative was worse. Engineers were being conscripted anyway, and if you went voluntarily, you got to be an officer. You got some control over your assignments. You got to use your expertise instead of just following orders. That's what I told myself anyway. For the first few years, it wasn't terrible. I worked on military infrastructure, roads, bridges, fortifications, technical problems with technical solutions. I could pretend I was still just an engineer, just building things, just solving puzzles. But bridges in wartime aren't neutral. They move troops and tanks and supplies. They enable invasions and occupations. Every bridge I built helped Germany prosecute a war that was becoming more horrific by the day. And when the tide turned, when we started losing instead of winning, My job changed. Now I destroyed bridges instead of building them. The first one was in France, 1944. We were retreating from Normandy, and the orders came down: deny the enemy every crossing. I stood on the Pont de Tancarville over the Seine, a beautiful suspension bridge, elegant cables sweeping up to the towers, and calculated exactly where to place the charges. I cried while I did it, actual tears running down my face while I worked out the math, because I understood what that bridge represented. Thousands of hours of human thought and labor, all that careful engineering, all that expertise, and I was going to erase it in 30 seconds. But I did it anyway, because that's what soldiers do. They follow orders. The bridge fell beautifully, if such a thing can be said. A perfect controlled demolition, the deck dropping cleanly into the water without damaging the foundations more than necessary. Professional, precise, utterly pointless. The Americans built a temporary bridge and crossed anyway, 3 days later. After France came the retreat into Germany itself. City by city, bridge by bridge, I destroyed the infrastructure of my own country, the Saar bridges, the Rhine crossings, or some of them. We failed to destroy the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, and the Americans poured across it before we could stop them. The main river bridges around Frankfurt. Each one felt like cutting off a piece of my own body. And now, finally, Munich, my home city. The bridges I'd studied as a student, walked across as a young engineer dreaming of his own designs. The Ludwigsbrücke, the Reichenbachbrücke, the Corneliusbrücke. I'd been ordered to destroy them all. I managed 3 before the Americans arrived, April 30th, 1945. The surrender came quickly. The Wehrmacht units defending Munich melted away. Some fled, some hid. Most just stopped fighting. There was no point anymore. The Americans had tanks, air superiority, overwhelming numbers. We had exhausted men with no ammunition and no hope. I was in a basement with what remained of my engineering battalion when they found us. 12 men, mostly in their 30s and 40s, engineers and technical specialists who'd been conscripted from civilian life. We'd destroyed our weapons the night before. We had nothing left but our tools and our shame. The American soldiers came down the stairs with rifles ready, shouting in English. I understood enough to know they were ordering us to stand with our hands up. We complied. A young lieutenant, couldn't have been more than 23, looked at our insignia, at the engineering badges on our uniforms. "Engineers?" he asked in broken German. "Ja, yes, civil engineers," I responded in English. "We surrender." His expression changed, not to sympathy exactly, but to something like understanding. "You're the guys blowing up the bridges," he said. It wasn't a question. "Following orders," I said, the universal excuse of defeated soldiers everywhere. "Yeah," he looked tired. "Well, the orders are over now. Come on, prisoner processing is set up at the Olympic Stadium." We were marched through Munich's ruins. My city, my beautiful city, reduced to rubble by years of Allied bombing and final desperate German resistance. I saw the Frauenkirche, its twin towers somehow still standing amid the devastation. I saw people, civilians, emerging from cellars, looking at us with expressions ranging from relief to hatred to simple exhaustion. We'd lost, completely, utterly, and everyone knew it. The processing camp at Olympic Stadium was chaos. Thousands of German soldiers, all being catalogued, questioned, searched. The Americans were efficient but not cruel. They separated officers from enlisted men. They checked for SS tattoos, for evidence of war crimes. They asked about our units, our service, our specializations. When I told them I was a civil engineer with a doctorate, the interviewing officer paused. "Bridges?" he asked. "Yes, among other things." "You speak good English?" "I studied it. Before the war, I hoped to work internationally." He made notes on his form. "Dr. Weber, you're being transferred to a specialized facility. Engineers are needed for reconstruction assessment." I didn't understand what that meant, but I was too tired to care. I'd been awake for 40 hours, had watched my world collapse, had become a prisoner of war. What difference did one camp versus another make? They transported us, about 30 captured engineers, to a facility outside Munich. It wasn't like the POW camps I'd heard about. It was an intact technical college that the Americans had commandeered. We had rooms, not barracks. Guards, yes, but not the harsh treatment I'd expected. That first night, lying on an actual bed for the first time in weeks, I tried to process what had happened. The war was over. Hitler was dead. We'd learned that during processing. Germany had lost. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built and then destroyed, had been for nothing. I should have felt devastated, and part of me did. But another part, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, felt relieved. It was finally over. May 3rd, 1945. 3 days after my capture, I was called to a meeting room. An American officer was waiting, a major with the Corps of Engineers insignia on his uniform. He was older, maybe 50, with grey hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent his career in the field. "Dr. Weber," he said, pronouncing it Weber instead of Weber, but I didn't correct him. "I'm Major Thomas Patterson. Sit down, please." I sat. He slid a folder across the table. "We've been reviewing captured personnel records. Your file is impressive. Technical University Munich, doctorate in structural engineering, specialization in bridge design. Published papers on suspension cable analysis, pre-war work on the Autobahn bridge projects. Is this accurate?" "Yes, sir." "And during the war, what were your assignments?" I told him. "The infrastructure projects in occupied France, the defensive fortifications in Italy, the bridge demolitions during the retreat, all of it." Patterson listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back. "So you built bridges, and then you blew them up?" "Yes, sir." "That must have been hard. For someone who loves the work, I mean." I looked at him, surprised by the empathy in his voice. "It was difficult," I admitted. "I'm a civil engineer too," Patterson said. "Columbia University, 1918. Worked on dam projects in the Southwest, then joined the Corps when the war started. I understand what it means to build things, and what it costs to destroy them." He opened another folder, this one containing photographs. My chest tightened as I recognized them. Munich's bridges, the ones I'd destroyed, now photographed by American reconnaissance. "We need to rebuild these," Patterson said. "The city can't function without them. Supplies, reconstruction equipment, displaced people trying to return home. Everything needs the bridges." I nodded. Of course they did. "Here's the situation, Dr. Weber. We have Bailey bridges, temporary structures we can throw up quickly, but they're not enough. We need permanent reconstruction, and we need it fast. We need engineers who understand these specific bridges, who know the foundations, the soil conditions, the load requirements." He paused. "We need you." The words hung in the air between us. "You want me to help rebuild what I destroyed?" I asked quietly. "I want you to do what you were trained to do. Build bridges. Fix what's broken. Help your own people honestly, because they're the ones who need these crossings. I'm a prisoner. You're a skilled professional who can make a difference. Dr. Weber, I'm not asking you to betray anyone. The war is over. This isn't military work, it's humanitarian work. People need to move, to trade, to live. Are you willing to help with that?" I should have felt angry, humiliated, used. Instead, I felt something that shocked me: hope. The chance to build again, to use my knowledge for construction instead of destruction, to repair some small part of the damage I'd helped cause. "Yes," I said, "I'll help." Patterson nodded. "Good. We start tomorrow. I'll have you assigned to my reconstruction team. You'll work under U.S. Army supervision, but you'll have significant input on the technical decisions. This is your city, Dr. Weber. Help us rebuild it." He stood and extended his hand. I stared at it. An American officer offering a handshake to a defeated German engineer. I took it. May 4th, 1945. The next morning they took me to the Ludwigsbrücke, or what remained of it, the bridge I'd demolished 5 days earlier. A temporary Bailey bridge had already been installed nearby, allowing military traffic to cross. But Patterson's team was assessing the old bridge, determining what could be salvaged, what needed complete replacement. I stood at the edge of the collapsed structure, looking at the twisted steel and shattered concrete in the river below. My work, my destruction. "Talk me through it," Patterson said, standing beside me. "What was the original design?" I swallowed hard and began. 3-span arch bridge, original construction 1857, reinforced and widened in 1923. Main span 60 meters, side spans 40 meters each. The foundations are limestone bedrock, very stable. The superstructure was steel-reinforced concrete, designed for both vehicle and tram traffic. And the demolition. Charges on the main span supports, timed for simultaneous detonation. The goal was to drop the center span while minimizing damage to the foundations and abutments, allowing for easier eventual reconstruction. "You planned for rebuilding even while you were destroying?" The observation struck me silent for a moment. "Yes," I finally said. "Force of habit, perhaps, or hope. Some small hope that this wouldn't be permanent." Patterson nodded slowly. "Well, that makes our job easier. Let's get a survey team down there and see what we're working with." Over the next hours, I worked alongside American engineers, soldiers who'd been architects and civil engineers in civilian life, now serving in the Corps of Engineers. We measured, calculated, photographed, discussed. It was strange, surreal. I was a German officer, a defeated enemy, working side by side with the men who'd conquered us. And yet, it felt natural, because we spoke the same language. Not English or German, but the universal language of engineering. Load calculations, stress analysis, material properties, foundation stability, technical problems with technical solutions. No ideology, no politics, just math and physics, and the shared goal of making something stand up. By late afternoon, we had a preliminary assessment. The foundations were intact, just as I'd planned. The abutments were salvageable. We'd need to completely replace the superstructure, but it was doable. With sufficient materials and labor, we could have a permanent bridge in place within 6 months. "Good work, Dr. Weber," Patterson said as we packed up for the day. "This is going to save us significant time and resources. Your knowledge of the original structure is invaluable." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, because something was building inside me, a pressure, an emotion I couldn't quite name. May 7th, 1945. VE Day. Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was officially over. We were working at another bridge site when the announcement came over the military radio. The American soldiers cheered, hugged each other, some cried with relief. I stood apart, watching them. We German engineers. There were 5 of us now. Patterson had recruited others from the POW camps. We didn't know how to react. Relief that the killing was done? Yes. Grief for our defeated nation? Absolutely. Shame at what Germany had done, what we'd been part of. That too. Patterson noticed me standing alone. He walked over, his expression serious. "Dr. Weber, this changes nothing about our work. The bridges still need building. People still need help. You're still part of this team." "I understand, sir." "Do you?" He looked at me intently. "Because I want to make sure you do. You're not here as cheap labor or as some kind of punishment. You're here because you have skills we need, and because, whether you believe it or not, you're helping your own people more than anyone else right now. Major Patterson, I destroyed these bridges. Now I'm rebuilding them. The irony is not lost on me. The irony," Patterson said, "is that you're probably the best person to rebuild them precisely because you understand them well enough to have destroyed them properly. You knew what you were doing then. You know what you're doing now. That expertise matters." He paused. "War makes us do terrible things, Dr. Weber, all of us. I've ordered demolitions too, in North Africa and Italy. I've destroyed things that people built with pride and care. That's what war is, organized destruction. But now the war's over. Now we build instead. And that's not irony, that's redemption. I felt my throat tighten. I don't deserve redemption. None of us do. But we get the chance anyway if we choose to take it. Are you going to keep punishing yourself, or are you going to do something useful with your guilt? I didn't answer. Couldn't. Patterson nodded. Think about it. Meanwhile, we have a bridge to design. I need your input on the span configuration by tomorrow. He walked away, leaving me standing amid the ruins of my city, thinking about destruction and construction, guilt and redemption, and whether skill could ever make up for the damage it had caused. May 15th, 1945. The work consumed me. We were operating on 3 bridge projects simultaneously now, the Ludwigsbrücke, the Reichenbachbrücke, and a smaller crossing on the outskirts of the city. I worked 16-hour days, calculating loads, drawing plans, consulting on material specifications. The American engineers treated me as a colleague, not quite an equal. I was still technically a prisoner, still under guard, but as a professional whose opinion mattered. They asked questions. They listened to my answers. They incorporated my suggestions into the designs. It was intoxicating. For the first time in years, I was using my education for its intended purpose, building, creating, solving problems, not through destruction, but through construction. But the guilt never left. Every time I looked at a collapsed bridge, I saw my own handiwork. Every calculation I made for reconstruction reminded me of the calculations I'd made for demolition. The 2 acts, destruction and creation, were disturbingly similar. The same principles, the same physics, just applied in opposite directions. One evening I was working late in the makeshift office, a commandeered classroom at the technical college. Another German engineer, a man named Klaus Hoffmann, was working at the next desk. Friedrich, he said quietly. May I ask you something? Of course. Do you sleep? I looked up, surprised by the question. Sometimes. Not well. I can't, Klaus said. Every time I close my eyes, I see the bridges falling. The ones we destroyed. And I wonder, what was the point? Why did we do it? The Americans crossed anyway. All we did was make our own people's lives harder. We followed orders, I said, the familiar excuse. That's not enough. That's never enough. Klaus's voice was sharp with self-recrimination. We have brains. We have engineering degrees. We should have known better, should have refused, and been shot for insubordination? Maybe that would have been better than living with this. I set down my pencil. Klaus, I don't have answers for you. I struggle with the same questions. But I know this. We can't undo what we did. We can only try to do better now. These bridges we're rebuilding, they're not redemption, but they're something. They're useful, they matter. Does that make up for the destruction? No, but it's better than doing nothing. Klaus nodded slowly. I suppose you're right. It's just hard to reconcile the 2 versions of ourselves, the destroyer and the builder. Maybe they're not 2 versions, I said. Maybe they're the same person, just making different choices based on different circumstances. The skills are neutral. The ethics change. I want to believe that. So do I. We returned to our calculations, 2 guilty men trying to build their way back to some kind of peace. June 12th, 1945. Major Patterson called me to his office. On his desk were new plans, not for Munich bridges, but for something larger. Dr. Weber, I'm expanding the reconstruction program. We need to assess and repair bridges throughout Bavaria, not just Munich. I'm recommending that you be assigned to the broader project. I stared at the maps, at the dozens of marked bridges spanning rivers throughout the region. All of these? Not alone, obviously, but you'd be the senior technical consultant. Your knowledge of German bridge engineering is proving invaluable. The temporary Bailey bridges are fine for now, but we need permanent reconstruction. That requires expertise we don't have. But you do. Major, I'm a prisoner of war. You're a skilled professional working on civilian reconstruction. There's a difference. Dr. Weber, I've been authorized to offer you a position as a civilian technical consultant. You'd still be monitored, still have restrictions on movement, but you'd be compensated fairly and treated as a specialist rather than a prisoner. Why? Because you're good at this, because we need you, and because, he paused, because you deserve the chance to build instead of destroy. That's what I think anyway. I looked at the plans again. Dozens of bridges, years of work, the chance to rebuild not just Munich, but an entire region's infrastructure, the chance to matter again in a positive way. I accept, I said. Patterson smiled. Good. There's one more thing. Next month I'm taking a small team to assess a major project, the Adolf Hitler Bridge over the Danube near Regensburg. It survived the war largely intact, but it needs evaluation. I want you on that team. I felt ice in my stomach. The Adolf Hitler Bridge. Yes, I know the name is... He trailed off. Well, names can be changed. The structure itself is impressive from the engineering reports. We need to assess its condition and plan for any necessary repairs. I worked on that bridge, I said quietly, in 1938, part of the design team for the approaches. It was one of my first major projects. Patterson's eyebrows rose. Then you're definitely the right person for the assessment. Can you handle it? Going back to something you built for the regime, could I? Going back to a bridge that bore Hitler's name, that I'd helped create during the height of my naive belief that engineering could be separated from politics? Yes, I said. I can handle it. But I wasn't sure if I was telling him the truth or lying to both of us. July 8th, 1945. We arrived at Regensburg on a grey morning. The city had been bombed, but not as heavily as Munich. The medieval old town was largely intact, its stone buildings having survived both the Allied air raids and the final battle for the city. And there, spanning the Danube in elegant arcs, stood the Adolf Hitler Bridge. It was beautiful. I'd forgotten how beautiful it was. 3 massive steel arches, painted in the same grey as the river on an overcast day. The approaches I'd helped design, sweeping up from both banks in gentle curves that distributed the load efficiently while creating visual harmony with the arches. One of the finest bridges in Germany, and it bore the name of the man who'd destroyed our country. Impressive, Patterson said, standing beside me. The reports didn't do it justice. It was meant to be a symbol, I said, of German engineering prowess, of the regime's grand infrastructure projects, of permanence. Is it sound? From here, it looks structurally intact, but we'll need to inspect the connections, check for bomb damage, assess the foundations. It survived the war, but that doesn't mean it's entirely healthy. We spent the next 3 days on that bridge, crawling over every rivet, every weld, every connection, measuring deflections, checking for stress fractures, testing the concrete in the approach spans. It was thorough, detailed work that required all of my training and experience, and the entire time, I was fighting with myself. This bridge represented everything I'd been. The young, ambitious engineer who'd believed that technical excellence was enough, who'd taken pride in serving the regime's infrastructure projects without thinking deeply about what those projects enabled. This bridge had moved Wehrmacht troops and supplies, had been part of the logistics network that prosecuted an evil war, was named after a monster, but it was also just a bridge, steel and concrete arranged in elegant arcs, a structure that spanned a barrier, that connected people and places, that would continue to serve the city long after the regime that built it was dust. Could a bridge be guilty, or was it just a tool, neutral until someone gave it purpose? On the 3rd evening, Patterson and I were standing on the main span, watching the sun set over the Danube. The other engineers had gone back to our quarters. We were alone on the bridge. "What are you thinking?" Patterson asked. "That this is probably the best work I ever did," I admitted. Technically, the approach curves, the way the load distributes through the arches, the efficiency of the design. I was proud of this. Should you not be? I don't know. I was 26 when I worked on this. I thought I was building something important, something lasting. And I was. But I didn't think about what it was for, what it would enable. It's a bridge, Dr. Weber. It enables crossing the river. That's what bridges do. But for whom? For what purpose? Patterson was quiet for a long moment. I understand the question. I do. But here's what I think. The bridge doesn't remember who built it or why. It just stands here doing its job. The regime that commissioned it is gone. The name will be changed. We're already discussing that. But the structure remains, and it'll serve whoever needs to cross the river. Germans, Americans, whoever. That's the thing about infrastructure. It outlasts the politics that created it. Is that absolution? No. But it's not damnation either. You can't undo building this bridge, Friedrich, but you can make sure the work you do from now on serves better purposes. That's all any of us can do. Try to make our future work better than our past work. I looked out at the river, at the city beyond, at the sky turning purple with evening. Major Patterson, I said slowly. When I was destroying bridges during the retreat, I told myself I was following orders, that I had no choice. But the truth is, I did have a choice. I could have refused, could have found a way to sabotage the demolitions, make them fail. I was skilled enough to make it look like accidents. Why didn't you? Because I was a coward. Because refusing would have meant consequences, court-martial, probably execution. And because part of me was still trying to serve Germany faithfully, even as Germany was dying. Duty, honor, following orders, all the things they teach you to value. And now? Now I know that duty to an immoral cause is not virtue, that following evil orders is not honor, that skill without ethics is just efficiency in the service of wrong. Patterson nodded. That's a hard lesson to learn. I wish I'd learned it earlier, before I helped build bridges for the Reich, before I destroyed bridges to slow the Allied advance, before any of it. But you've learned it now. That matters. Does it? Can learning better principles after the damage is done really matter? Yes, Patterson said firmly. Because you still have years ahead of you, years of work, of choices, of opportunities to use your skills for good purposes. The past is fixed, Friedrich. The future isn't. That's where your choices matter now. I felt something break inside me then. Some wall I'd been holding up, some defense against the full weight of what I'd done and been. And I wept. Standing on a bridge I'd helped design for a regime I'd served without sufficient question, crying while an American officer, an enemy who'd become something like a friend, stood beside me in silence. I cried for the bridges I'd destroyed, for the waste of it all, the senseless destruction, for the years I'd spent in service to evil, telling myself that engineering was neutral and that my responsibility ended with technical excellence. I cried for the younger version of myself, the eager student who'd wanted to build beautiful things and change the world, who'd somehow ended up here, in the ruins of his country, trying to rebuild what he'd helped tear down. And I cried because an enemy officer had shown me more grace and respect than I deserved, had given me the chance to use my skills for good, had treated me as a colleague when I should have been just another defeated prisoner. I'm sorry, I finally managed. This is unprofessional. No, Patterson said quietly. This is human, and it's probably overdue. We stood there as darkness fell, two engineers on a bridge that would outlast both of us carrying our own guilt and trying to find our way towards something better. When we returned to Munich the next day, I was different. The crying hadn't erased the guilt, nothing would ever do that. But it had released something, some toxic accumulation of shame and self-deception that had been building for years. I couldn't undo what I'd done, couldn't unlearn my complicity, couldn't retrieve the destroyed bridges or give back the years I'd spent in service to evil. But I could build. I could use my expertise for reconstruction. I could spend whatever years I had left trying to create more than I'd destroyed. It wouldn't be enough. It would never be enough. but it was something. And as Major Patterson had said, trying to make our future work better than our past work was all any of us could do. So I would try. I would build bridges. And maybe someday I'd build enough that the scales would start to balance. Not toward redemption. I didn't deserve that. But toward usefulness, toward contributing something positive to a world I'd helped damage. That would have to be enough. September 1945, Frankfurt, Germany. The Rhine is brown today. Not the romantic blue of tourist postcards, but the muddy brown of a working river carrying the runoff of a destroyed continent. I'm standing where the Alte Brücke used to be. The old bridge, 8 centuries of history, gone in a single blast last March. I didn't destroy this one. Another engineer, another battalion, another desperate attempt to slow the inevitable. But I might as well have. The calculations would have been the same. The result was the same. And now I'm here to rebuild it. Major Patterson's reconstruction program has expanded beyond Bavaria. We're working throughout the American occupation zone now. A team of 25 engineers, 15 of them German, assessing and repairing the infrastructure that war destroyed. We've become specialists in resurrection, bringing bridges back from the dead. It's strange work, necessary work. But every day I'm confronted with the evidence of what we did to ourselves. The Frankfurt project is massive. The Rhine is Germany's most important waterway, and Frankfurt is a critical crossing point. Without bridges, the city is paralyzed. Supply chains are broken. Commerce can't flow. People can't reach jobs or family or food. We're not just building bridges. We're rebuilding a society's circulatory system. The American occupation authorities have given us enormous resources: steel, concrete, equipment, labor. They want permanent structures, not just temporary fixes. They want bridges that will stand for generations. We're not just rebuilding for now, Patterson told me when we started the project. We're building for the Germany that comes after all this. A peaceful Germany, a democratic Germany, one that trades with its neighbors instead of invading them. I want to believe that's possible. Some days I even do. October 15th, 1945. Klaus Hoffmann, the engineer who couldn't sleep, who I'd talked with back in Munich, didn't make it. He hanged himself in his quarters 3 weeks ago, left a note that said simply, "I can't build enough to make up for what I destroyed. I'm sorry." His funeral was small. A few of us German engineers, some American officers who'd worked with him, a military chaplain who said words about redemption and forgiveness that felt hollow in the face of such despair. Patterson pulled me aside after the service. "Are you okay, Friedrich?" "I understand why he did it," I said. "The weight of it. The impossibility of balance. Building one bridge doesn't undo destroying 3. Building 10 doesn't undo 30. The math never works out in our favor." "Is that how you see this? As an equation to balance, isn't it?" Patterson shook his head. "No. It's not about balancing destruction with construction. It's about choosing what you do with the time you have left. Klaus chose to stop. You're choosing to continue. Neither choice makes up for the past, but one of them creates a future." "Or what if the future isn't enough? Then at least you tried. That's more than doing nothing, more than giving up." I wanted to argue with him, to insist that the guilt was too heavy, that no amount of bridge building could ever be enough. But I was too tired, and he might have been right. So I kept working, for Klaus, for myself, for the cities that needed crossings, because what else was there? December 1945, winter in the ruins of Germany is brutal. Not just the cold, though that's bad enough, but the psychological weight of it. Everywhere you look, destruction, rubble, half-standing buildings, people living in basements and improvised shelters, lines for food, for coal, for any scrap of normalcy. And we're building bridges. It feels absurd sometimes, like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. What good is a bridge when people are starving, when cities are ruins, when the entire country is occupied and broken. But then I see it. The moment when a bridge opens, when traffic can flow again, trucks carrying supplies, people crossing to reach jobs or family, commerce resuming, slowly, tentatively, life finding a way to continue despite everything. The bridges matter. They're not enough, but they matter. We finished the first phase of the Frankfurt-Rhine crossing in early December. Not the full permanent structure that will take years, but a substantial temporary bridge capable of heavy traffic. The opening ceremony was modest. Some American officers, some German city officials, a few words about cooperation and rebuilding. I stood in the crowd, watching the first trucks cross. American military vehicles, German civilian trucks, people on bicycles and on foot, all of them using something I'd helped create. For the first time since the war ended, I felt something that wasn't guilt or shame or grief. I felt useful. February 1946. Major Patterson called me to his office with an unusual request. Friedrich, I've been asked to consult on a project back in the States, bridge assessment in the Tennessee Valley, part of the TVA infrastructure review. I'm recommending you as part of the consultation team. I stared at him. America? You want me to go to America? Not permanently. A 3-month assignment. There are some complex structural issues with several older bridges, and your expertise in steel arch construction would be valuable. The TVA engineers have been impressed with your work on the technical reports we've been sharing. Major, I'm a German officer, a former enemy. How would I even... The paperwork's already in motion. You'd travel as a civilian technical consultant under U.S. Army Corps of Engineers contract. There are precedents. We've been recruiting German scientists and engineers for various projects. This would be similar, just temporary. Operation Paperclip. I'd heard about it. German rocket scientists going to America to work on missiles, engineers working on jet propulsion, the Americans taking German expertise and putting it to use. But this felt different. Not weapons, not military technology, just bridges, civilian infrastructure. The same work I was already doing, just on the other side of the Atlantic. Why me? I asked. Because you're very good at this, Patterson said simply, and because I think it would be good for you. To see that your skills have value beyond just fixing what was broken here. To work on projects that aren't about cleaning up after war. What would I be doing? Specifically, assessment and consultation. Some of the TVA bridges are showing structural stress after years of heavy use. We need expert eyes on them, recommendations for reinforcement or replacement. Your work on the Frankfurt project showed sophisticated understanding of steel arch behavior under dynamic loads. That's exactly what we need. I thought about it. America. The country that had defeated us. The country whose soldiers I'd worked alongside for months now, learning to see them as colleagues rather than enemies. The country whose bridges I'd once studied with admiration, back when I was a student dreaming of international projects. I'll go, I said. Patterson smiled. Good. We leave in 3 weeks. Better brush up on your English technical vocabulary. March 12th, 1946. The flight to America was surreal. A U.S. Army transport plane, flying from Frankfurt to Newfoundland to New York. 18 hours in the air, watching Europe disappear behind us, and then, eventually, the American coast appearing ahead. I'd imagined America many times, read about it, studied its engineering projects, dreamed of visiting, but I'd never imagined arriving like this. A defeated German engineer, traveling under American military authority, on my way to consult on infrastructure projects for the country that had destroyed mine. The irony was not lost on me. We landed at LaGuardia Airport in New York. My first view of America was the Manhattan skyline. Those impossible skyscrapers, untouched by war, gleaming in the afternoon sun, so much taller than anything in Europe, so abundant, so untouched. While Germany was rubble, America was pristine. Patterson saw my expression. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? Your country didn't suffer. I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Not on our soil, no, but we lost men. Lots of them. The war cost America too, just differently. And he was right, of course, but it was hard to acknowledge that while looking at those intact buildings, those functioning streets, those people going about their lives, as if the war had been something that happened somewhere else, which, for them, it had been. We traveled by train to Tennessee, through Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina. I pressed my face to the window like a child, watching America slide past. Farms, towns, cities, all of it whole, all of it functioning. The abundance was staggering. Food in the dining car, actual steaks, fresh vegetables, coffee, desserts. People dressed well, reading newspapers, traveling for business or pleasure. It was like being on a different planet from the Germany I'd left behind. "Is it always like this?" I asked Patterson over dinner in the dining car. "Like what?" "So much, so plentiful." "America came through the war with its industrial capacity intact," Patterson said. "Actually increased. We weren't bombed. Our factories kept running. We had rationing during the war, but nothing like what Europe experienced." "It must be strange," I said, "to know the rest of the world is starving and destroyed, while you have all this." "It is. But that's also why we're helping with reconstruction, Marshall Plan, infrastructure assistance, food aid. America can afford to help, and it's in our interest to help rebuild a stable Europe." I nodded, but I was thinking about something else. About how we Germans had started a war, thinking we needed more resources, more space, more everything. And here was America, with abundance we couldn't have imagined, and they hadn't needed to conquer anyone to get it. They'd just built it. Maybe that was the lesson we should have learned. March 18th, 1946, Knoxville, Tennessee. The Tennessee Valley Authority was one of America's great infrastructure projects, a massive system of dams, bridges, and electrical generation facilities built during the Depression. The bridges were elegant structures, many of them designed in the 1930s by first-rate engineers, and some of them were showing their age. I met with the TVA engineering team in a conference room overlooking the Tennessee River. 6 American engineers, most of them older men with decades of experience. And me, the German consultant, the former enemy, the destroyer-turned-builder. The lead engineer, a man named Robert Harrison, got straight to business. "Dr. Weber, thank you for coming. We've reviewed your technical reports from the Frankfurt project. Your analysis of dynamic loading on steel arch structures was particularly impressive. We have similar concerns with several of our bridges." He spread drawings across the table. Beautiful technical drawings, the kind that made my engineer's heart sing. Plans, elevations, stress diagrams. "These 3 bridges are showing signs of fatigue cracking in the arch ribs. We've done preliminary analysis, but we want a second opinion from someone with your expertise before we make recommendations on reinforcement." I studied the drawings. Classic steel arch construction, similar to bridges I'd worked on in Germany, but larger scale, longer spans, carrying heavier loads than the original designers had probably anticipated. "The cracking pattern suggests stress concentration at the connections," I said, falling into technical language without thinking. "Have you measured the deflection under load?" "Yes, it's within tolerances, but at the high end. We're concerned about fatigue failure if the loads continue to increase." For the next 3 hours, we discussed stress analysis, material properties, reinforcement options. I forgot where I was, forgot that I was technically still a prisoner, still under US military supervision, forgot everything except the pure pleasure of working on a complex engineering problem with colleagues who respected my input. They asked my opinion, they listened to my suggestions, they treated me as an equal. It was intoxicating. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked alongside the TVA engineers. We inspected the bridges in person, took measurements, ran calculations. I recommended reinforcement strategies, designed connection improvements, consulted on material specifications, and they implemented my recommendations. These American engineers, working on American infrastructure, trusted the expertise of a German engineer who'd spent the war building and destroying bridges for their enemy. One evening, Harrison invited me to dinner at his home. His wife served pot roast and potatoes, and we sat at their kitchen table talking about engineering, about bridges, about the challenges of maintaining aging infrastructure. "Your work has been invaluable, Friedrich," Harrison said. "May I call you Friedrich?" "Of course. I have to ask you something, and forgive me if it's too personal, but how do you reconcile your work now with what you did during the war? Major Patterson mentioned that you were involved in bridge demolitions." I set down my fork. Here it was, the question I'd been waiting for. "I don't reconcile it," I said honestly. "I can't. Every bridge I build now reminds me of the bridges I destroyed. Every calculation I make for construction echoes the calculations I made for demolition. The skills are the same. The ethics are different. Do you regret it? The demolitions? Every single one, they were pointless. The Americans crossed anyway. All we did was make our own people's lives harder, delay the reconstruction. It was waste, senseless waste." Harrison nodded slowly. "War makes fools of us all. I worked on fortifications in the Pacific, concrete bunkers, gun emplacements, structures designed for killing. I was proud of the work at the time. Good engineering, efficient designs. Now I look back and wonder what I was thinking." "But you were fighting a just war," I said, "defending against aggression. I was serving an evil regime. That's different." "Is it? In the moment doing the work, does it feel different? Or do we all just convince ourselves that what we're doing is necessary, justified, the right thing?" I thought about that. I don't know. But I think the answer matters less than what we do afterward. I can't undo my wartime work, but I can try to build more than I destroyed, try to be useful instead of harmful. That's all any of us can do, Harrison's wife said quietly. Try to be better tomorrow than we were yesterday. I looked at these Americans, this couple who'd invited a former enemy into their home, who were treating me with kindness and respect I didn't deserve, who saw past the uniform I'd worn and the regime I'd served to the skills I had and the work I could do. And I felt something break inside me again. Not the sharp pain of guilt, something gentler, something like gratitude. April 1946. Near the end of my time in Tennessee, Harrison asked me to consult on one more project. A new bridge design, not a repair. They were planning a crossing over a particularly wide section of the Tennessee River, and they wanted my input on the arch configuration. "This would be your design," Harrison said, "obviously in collaboration with our team, but your expertise would be central to it. Would you be willing? You want me to design an American bridge. We want you to help design a bridge that will serve this community for generations. That's what engineers do, Friedrich. We build things that outlast us, that serve people we'll never meet. This bridge won't be German or American. It'll just be a bridge, a good bridge, if we do our job right." I looked at the site plans, at the river cross-section, at the geotechnical data. My mind was already running through configurations, calculating spans, considering approaches. "Yes," I said, "I'd be honored." Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with the TVA team on the preliminary design. We sketched options, ran calculations, debated aesthetics versus efficiency. It was collaborative work at its best, different perspectives and expertise combining to create something better than any of us could have done alone. And it was my design at the center of it. My arch configuration. My approach spans. My structural system. A bridge in America, built by the country that defeated us, designed in part by a German engineer who'd spent the war serving evil. The symbolism was almost too perfect. April 28, 1946. On my last day in Tennessee, Harrison organized a small gathering. The TVA engineering team, Major Patterson, a few local officials. They presented me with a plaque. Dr. Friedrich Weber, Consulting Engineer, Tennessee Valley Authority Bridge Assessment Project, March-April 1946. With gratitude for your expertise and contributions. I stood there holding this plaque, this physical evidence that I'd contributed something positive, that I'd been useful, that my skills had value beyond destruction, and I wept. Not the cathartic weeping on the Adolf Hitler Bridge. This was different, quieter, deeper. I wept because these Americans, these former enemies, had given me something I hadn't known I needed: recognition, respect, the acknowledgement that I was more than my worst actions, more than my service to an evil regime, more than the bridges I'd destroyed. They saw me as an engineer, a colleague, a person with valuable knowledge and skills. They trusted me to help them build something important. That trust, unearned, undeserved, freely given, broke me in the best possible way. Harrison put his hand on my shoulder. "Friedrich, you okay? You asked me to help you," I managed. "You asked me, a German engineer who destroyed bridges for the enemy, to help design an American bridge, to contribute to your country's infrastructure. Why?" "Because you're good at this," Harrison said simply. "Because skills matter. Because the war's over and we need to build instead of destroy. Because holding grudges is exhausting and rebuilding requires everyone's best efforts. I don't deserve this kindness." "Maybe not, but you're getting it anyway. That's called grace, Friedrich. We don't earn it. We receive it and then we try to pass it on." Patterson stepped forward. "Dr. Weber, I want you to know something. I didn't bring you to America just because we needed your expertise, though we did. I brought you because I wanted you to see that your work matters beyond just fixing what the war broke. I wanted you to see that you have value as an engineer, independent of your past. I've spent a year trying to build enough to balance what I destroyed," I said, "but the math never works out. I can't rebuild enough bridges to make up for the ones I demolished." "You're not supposed to balance it," Patterson said. "You're supposed to move forward. Past actions are fixed. Future actions are choices. This bridge you helped design, it'll stand for 50 years, maybe 100. It'll serve tens of thousands of people. That's your legacy now, Friedrich. Not the bridges you destroyed, but the ones you build." I looked at the plaque in my hands, at the Americans surrounding me, at the river beyond the window where someday a bridge would stand that I'd helped create. And I understood I'd been trying to earn redemption through work, to calculate my way back to moral equilibrium. But that wasn't how it worked. Redemption wasn't a math problem. It was a choice. A daily choice to use my skills for good, to build instead of destroy, to contribute positively despite my past. I couldn't undo what I'd done, but I could choose what I did next. And these Americans, these generous, trusting, forward-looking Americans, had given me that choice, had seen past my guilt to my potential, had offered me not forgiveness exactly, but something better: opportunity, the chance to matter in a positive way, the chance to build. May 1946. Return to Germany. The flight back to Europe felt different from the flight out. I was returning to a broken country, to cities in ruins, to the massive work of reconstruction. But I was returning changed. I'd seen America's abundance. I'd worked with American engineers as an equal. I'd contributed to their infrastructure, been trusted with their projects, been treated with respect and dignity I hadn't earned. And I'd learned that the opposite of destruction isn't just construction, it's contribution. It's using your skills to serve something larger than yourself. It's choosing to build even when the guilt says you don't deserve to. When we landed in Frankfurt, Patterson pulled me aside. "Friedrich, I have a proposal. The Corps of Engineers is expanding the reconstruction program. We need a chief technical consultant for bridge projects throughout the American occupation zone. It would be a civilian position, well compensated, based in Frankfurt. You'd lead a team of engineers, German and American, working on major infrastructure reconstruction. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you the opportunity to do what you're best at, on a large scale, for as long as the reconstruction takes, which will be years, decades probably. Germany's infrastructure is devastated. We need the best engineers we can get. You're one of the best. Major Patterson, Thomas. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll help us rebuild, not to balance what you destroyed, but because it needs doing, and you can do it well. Say you'll use your skills to make the future better than the past. I thought about Klaus, who couldn't carry the guilt and chose to stop. I thought about the bridges falling, the waste of destruction, the years I'd spent serving evil. And I thought about the TVA engineers, about Harrison's trust, about that plaque, about choosing to move forward instead of calculating backward. Yes, I said, I'll help you rebuild. 1946 to 1950, the reconstruction years. For the next 4 years, I threw myself into the work, chief technical consultant leading teams of engineers across the American zone. We rebuilt dozens of bridges, major crossings over the Rhine, the Main, the Danube. We designed new structures and repaired old ones. We trained young German engineers who'd lost their mentors in the war. We established standards and protocols and safety systems. We built. The work was enormous, overwhelming, sometimes impossible. Germany's infrastructure was more damaged than anyone had initially realized. Resources were scarce, skilled workers were hard to find. The winters were brutal, the politics were complicated. But we persisted, and slowly, so slowly, the bridges came back. The crossings reopened, commerce resumed, people could move again. The country's circulatory system began to function. I worked alongside American engineers who became friends. I trained German engineers who became colleagues. I consulted with British and French engineers working in their zones. We weren't enemies anymore. We were just engineers, solving problems, building infrastructure, trying to create something functional from the ruins. In 1948, the Marshall Plan began in earnest. American money flooded into Europe, funding reconstruction on a scale we couldn't have imagined. The bridge projects accelerated. We moved from emergency repairs to permanent reconstruction, from survival to renewal. And through it all, I carried the guilt. I never forgot what I'd been, what I'd done, what I'd served. Every bridge I built reminded me of bridges I'd destroyed. The past never disappeared, but Patterson was right. The past was fixed, the future was choice. And I chose to build. August 1950, Regensburg. 5 years after the war ended, I returned to the Adolf Hitler Bridge. It had been renamed, of course, the Nibelungenbrücke now, after the medieval epic. The Nazi taint was being scrubbed away, slowly, incompletely. The bridge itself stood unchanged. The same elegant arches, the same approaches I'd helped design when I was young and foolish and thought that engineering was enough. But I was different. I brought with me the completion report for the Frankfurt Rhine reconstruction, the project we'd worked on for nearly 5 years. A massive, permanent bridge, state-of-the-art design, built to last generations. One of the finest bridge projects in post-war Europe. My design, my work, my legacy. I stood on the Nibelungenbrücke, looking at the bridge I'd helped build for the Reich. And I thought about the bridge I'd just completed for the new Germany. Both were technically excellent. Both would serve for decades. But one had been built for conquest, the other for connection. Same skills, different purposes. That was the lesson, finally. Not that engineering was neutral. It wasn't. Not that my work could balance out my guilt. It couldn't. But that skills could be redirected. That expertise could serve different masters. That a destroyer could become a builder, not through redemption, but through choice. Daily choice, perpetual choice, the choice to use knowledge for good, despite the temptation to give in to guilt and despair. September 1950. Frankfurt. Major Patterson, Colonel Patterson now, promoted for his reconstruction work, called me to his office one last time. "Friedrich, I'm rotating back to the States next month. My time in Germany is ending." "I'm sorry to hear that. You've been important. To this work. To me. The work will continue. You'll continue. You don't need me anymore." "I don't know about that." Patterson smiled. "Friedrich, when I first recruited you in May 1945, you were a broken man. Guilty, ashamed, convinced that you could never do enough to make up for what you'd done. Do you remember?" "Yes. Look at what you've built since then. Dozens of bridges, training programs for young engineers, design standards that will guide German reconstruction for decades. You've contributed more to rebuilding this country than almost anyone else I know. It's not enough. It'll never be enough." "You're right. It won't. But that's not the point. The point is that you kept trying anyway, that you didn't let guilt paralyze you, that you chose to be useful instead of penitent." He pulled out a folder. "I'm recommending you for a civilian award, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Distinguished Civilian Service Medal, for your contributions to post-war reconstruction." I stared at him. An American military award? For a German engineer who spent the war destroying bridges? For a skilled professional who spent the peace rebuilding them? Who trained the next generation? Who worked tirelessly to restore Germany's infrastructure? That's what the award recognizes, Friedrich. Not your past, your present, your contributions. I don't deserve it. Probably not. But you're getting it anyway. Just like you didn't deserve the chance to work on the TVA project, but I gave you that too. Do you see the pattern? Grace, Friedrich, unearned opportunity, the chance to be better than your worst moments. Why? I asked. Why have you done all this? Why did you trust me, recruit me, give me opportunities, treat me as a colleague instead of an enemy? Patterson thought for a moment. Because I'm an engineer too. And I know that skills are valuable, that knowledge matters, that expertise shouldn't be wasted, but also because I think people can change, can choose to be different. And I saw in you someone who wanted to be different, who was trying to be better, who had the courage to keep working despite the guilt. I'm still guilty. Yes, but you're also useful. Both things are true. You can carry guilt and still contribute positively. That's what maturity is, Friedrich, holding multiple truths at once. He stood and extended his hand. Thank you for your service. To Germany, to reconstruction, to building instead of destroying. I shook his hand, this American colonel who'd changed my life, who'd given me purpose when I had none, who'd shown me that redemption wasn't about balancing equations, but about daily choices. Thank you, Thomas, for everything, for seeing past what I was to what I might become. You're welcome. Now go build some more bridges. Germany needs them. October 1950. The award ceremony was small but official. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers headquarters in Frankfurt. A few officers, some German officials, some of the engineers I'd worked with over the years. Colonel Patterson presented the medal and citation. I stood at attention, this former Wehrmacht officer receiving an American military award, trying to process the absurdity and grace of it all. The citation read, "For exceptional service to the United States Army Corps of Engineers reconstruction efforts in Germany, 1945-1950. Dr. Weber's technical expertise, dedication to excellence, and tireless commitment to rebuilding German infrastructure have contributed significantly to the success of post-war reconstruction. His work exemplifies the highest standards of the engineering profession and the possibility of reconciliation through shared purpose." After the ceremony, one of the young German engineers I'd trained approached me. "Dr. Weber, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Matthias." "How do you do it? Carry what you carry and still work? I've heard the stories about the bridge demolitions during the war. How do you live with that?" I looked at this young man. barely 25, who'd been a teenager during the war, who was now learning to build bridges in the ruins his elders had created. "I don't live with it exactly," I said. "I live despite it. I choose every day to be useful instead of penitent, to build instead of mourn, to contribute to the future instead of dwelling on the past. Does it work? Does building enough eventually balance what was destroyed? No, the math never balances. But that's not the point. The point is trying anyway. The point is that we have skills, we have knowledge, we have the ability to contribute positively, even though we've contributed negatively in the past. And we have a choice: use those skills or waste them, build or surrender." "I want to build," Matthias said. "Then build, and teach others to build. And remember that every bridge is a choice to connect rather than divide, to serve rather than dominate, to contribute rather than destroy. Is that what these bridges are for you? Choices. Every single one." December 1950. Winter again. 5 years since that first winter in the ruins, working on the Frankfurt project, trying to figure out how to live with what I'd done. I was reviewing plans for a new bridge over the Neckar River when I received a letter. American stamps, Tennessee postmark. Robert Harrison, the TVA engineer. "Dear Friedrich, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to let you know that the bridge we designed together, the one you helped develop during your time here, is moving forward. Construction begins next spring. It's going to be a beautiful structure, exactly as we envisioned. The official name will be the Cumberland River Bridge, but those of us who worked on it are calling it something else among ourselves. The Friendship Bridge, because it represents what we built together. American and German engineers, former enemies, working toward a common purpose. You asked me that last day why we trusted you, why we asked you to help us. I've thought about that question a lot over the years. Here's my answer. Because engineering, at its best, is about service, about using knowledge to solve problems and improve lives. And service doesn't have nationality, it doesn't carry grudges, it doesn't dwell on past conflicts. You were an engineer who could help us build something good. That's all that mattered. I hope you're still building, Friedrich. I hope you're still choosing to use your skills for good, despite the weight of the past. Because the world needs what you can create. Your friend, Robert Harrison. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at my desk as snow fell outside, thinking about choices and service and bridges that connected not just riverbanks, but former enemies. The Friendship Bridge. An American bridge, partially designed by a German engineer, named for the connection it represented. I thought about the young version of myself, studying American bridges with admiration, dreaming of international projects. I'd imagined contributing to American infrastructure someday, but not like this, not as a former enemy, not carrying this guilt, not after everything that had happened. But here I was, contributing, building, serving, not redeemed, never redeemed, but useful. And maybe that was enough. 15 years after the reconstruction began, I stood at the opening ceremony for the last major bridge in my reconstruction portfolio. A suspension bridge over the Rhine at Düsseldorf, elegant, modern, built to the highest standards. I was 54 years old. I'd spent 2 decades building bridges, first for the Reich, then against it, and finally for the new Germany. Hundreds of crossings, thousands of hours of calculations, millions of tons of steel and concrete. My life's work was bridges. Some of them enabled evil, some of them fell to my own demolition charges. And some, I hoped, would serve peace and commerce and human connection for generations to come. A reporter interviewed me at the opening. "Dr. Weber, you're one of Germany's most accomplished bridge engineers. You've designed or reconstructed over 40 major crossings. What drives you?" I thought about that question, about Klaus, who couldn't carry the weight, about Patterson, who gave me a chance, about Harrison, who trusted me, about all the bridges, built and destroyed, past and future, guilt and contribution. A bridge, I said finally, is a choice to connect, to span what divides, to make crossing possible. Every bridge I design is a choice to serve that purpose. That's what drives me, the choice. Even after everything, after the war, the destruction, especially after everything, because I know what destruction looks like, I know what it costs, and I choose to build instead. The reporter wrote that down, unaware of the depths beneath those words, unaware of the demolished bridges, the war service, the guilt that never disappeared. He just saw an accomplished engineer discussing his craft. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was what grace looked like, being seen for what you contributed rather than just what you'd destroyed. Being judged by present choices rather than past failures. I didn't deserve that grace. But I'd received it anyway, from Patterson and Harrison and countless others who'd chosen to see my potential rather than just my guilt. And I'd tried, imperfectly, inadequately, but persistently, to be worthy of that trust. Not through redemption, which was impossible, but through service, through daily choices to build, to teach, to contribute positively despite the weight of the past. As the new bridge opened to traffic, cars and trucks and people crossing the Rhine using something I'd helped create, I felt the familiar mix of pride and guilt, accomplishment and shame. Both were true, both would always be true, but so was this. I was still building, still choosing connection over division, still trying to be useful instead of paralyzed, still answering the question that Patterson had posed 15 years earlier. What will you do with the time you have left? I would build bridges. That was my answer then. It remained my answer now. It would be my answer until the day I died. Because in the end, we're defined not by our worst moments, but by our persistent choices. Not by what we've destroyed, but by what we choose to build despite our destruction. And I chose to build. Every day, every bridge, every crossing, I chose to build. Thank you for following Friedrich's journey from destroyer to builder, from guilt to contribution. If this story of transformation through service resonated with you, subscribe for more untold engineering stories from Wept 2 and its aftermath. Like this video if you believe skills can be redirected toward good, even after serving evil. Comment below. What does redemption mean when you can never balance the scales? How do we move forward while carrying the weight of the past? Your insights matter. Share them below. Remember, we're defined by our persistent choices, not just our worst moments. We can always choose to build. See you in the next story.